Have you ever wondered how the Lego Space CMF series released earlier this year would look like if it would actually acknowledge all of the space subthemes that we grew up with, instead of just some random figures that most of us won't even use? If so, then I got you covered, because I've created my own Space CMF figures as part of my ongoing series in which I take on different themes from the 90s with custom boxes and leaflets to make the most immersive experience possible. So get ready for yet another unboxing of my custom CMFs that will blow you right out of orbit with tons of nostalgia combined with a bunch of modern Lego pieces, making them something you'll just need in your collection. So let's get started right now. Now don't get me wrong, the Lego Space CMF series that Lego released wasn't all that bad, as we got a couple of awesome figures and lots of useful pieces that will for sure come in handy in many MOCs. But if you've been following the previous episodes of my series, you'll know that I had to make it better and with my personal touch. But first, before we jump into the unboxing, as usual, I just have to say that the Lego logo is a trademark of the Lego Group, which does not sponsor, authorize or endorse this product, and it was only made for entertainment purposes, not for resale. Looking at the front, you already know that this will be a nostalgic series, as we have some of our most beloved space factions already here that would make all of us excited if they would land on the store shelves. We of course have all the proper markings on the box showing that this is in fact Series 4, and all of the other necessary information with the standard Lego logo above the figures, and of course my logo in the back. As for the leaflet, this time I wanted to organize the figures more or less by the years that the original themes were released, starting from 1989 when the first Space Police was introduced, as I didn't want to include the Neoclassic and Futuron figures because, let's face it, they were perfect as they were back in the day, and I didn't really have the technical possibility to introduce new colors to those themes, as Lego probably would, like they did over the last few years. But let's not focus on the paper side of things too much and finally jump into unboxing these awesome figures, because I just can't wait to show you what I've made. And the first one on the list, like I said, is the Space Police. And here I have to admit that the one that Lego released didn't actually need much tuning, as the release figure was already very good. So besides the obvious parts I took from that figure, I decided to switch the legs with ones with more details taken from a Stormtrooper, and I gave her some different accessories. So the armor that Lego gave us now has a flexible hose attached to some sort of a space tonfa to stop the space criminals she encounters, and to get some additional help, I gave her a space dog from Star Wars Solo sets, which just fits so great to this team in my opinion. The next figure is another one that I haven't really changed that much, and that is the M-Tron. I decided to leave the entire suit unchanged, but I just had to use the neon green visor on the helmet, as it was a thing that bugged me the most in this Lego figure. And as for equipment I used, I changed the backpack that the Lego figure had for a red jetpack, to which I've connected that awesome new flexible piece, and I used a neon green crystal showing the use of her new tool. But wanting to bring more classic parts to this series, I also gave her a classic metal detector that was introduced with the first space sets, and also a small geode, so she has something to work with. M-Tron was a mining faction after all. Next one on the line is Ice Planet, and here is where the changes are a bit more noticeable. First of all, I've used the original torso from the 90s with the armor and legs unchanged, but what I just had to do is give the most iconic visor on the helmet and the neon orange skis, which I just couldn't believe Lego didn't include in their version. As for the rest, A white accessories belt and a custom-made chainsaw to crush the ice on the frozen planet were just what this figure needed, and I just had to leave the newly introduced Space Penguin because it was just a perfect piece to give. Now, it's time for a figure that I think Lego messed up totally in their series, but at least it had a great chest piece, so I left it as it was, but I used regular arms instead of that mutated double one, and I used the dual molded legs from the Space Police figure. I also gave him a piece of black armor and a narrow cape on the back, but instead of using a regular air tank like I first wanted, I gave him a jetpack to make this figure more modern, and a custom-made rifle to wreak some space havoc. And if that wasn't enough, I decided to make him a robot companion, even though robots were not included in the second issue of Blacktron, but let's consider him a nod to the first line of this faction from the 80s. Now, let's jump to the figures that were not reintroduced by LEGO since the 90s, and the first one in line is Unitron. They were supposed to be a military faction replacing Space Police, but were not common at all in Europe as there were only 2 sets available back then, but I was lucky enough to get the Space Battle Pack as a kid, and I have to admit that this one was one of my favorite figures back then. So as a military man, that's exactly how I've equipped this guy, with a blaster, some kind of a space tasing device, and a piece of armor taken from Djinn on top of a classic torso from the original figure. I also made use of a new Ninjago head that just fits here perfectly, as it is very reminiscent of the original one with cyber glasses used back then, and of course I put this gorgeous printed helmet the original figure came with, and we got ourselves a perfect remake for this faction. The next figure is one that some of you may already recognize from one of my February MOCs, and that is Spyrious. Having the classic torso with some newer printed legs, a piece of armor from a Praetorian guard, and a classic air tank on the back, this guy didn't need much tuning from what I did for that rover, but I decided to switch the visor to a dark blue one, even though the original figures were using neon green, but I think that this color fits much better here. And as for add-ons, besides the custom blaster and the first version of the walkie-talkie he has, I decided to make a twist to the Spyrious robot, and I used the classic head with trans-clear helmet on top of a newly introduced body from the Dreams line, and we got ourselves the cutest spy droid on wheels ever. Now jumping to the next figure, we have another one of my most beloved factions, Exploriens. And here I decided to go with a robot that was an integral part of that sub-theme, using the original torso and legs that are great quality even for today's standards, but on top of that I used a head from a Ninjago cyborg and the best piece of armor I could imagine. I finally found a way to use the Kryptonian armor in the best way, and that is by attaching 2 neon green visors on the sides, which make up a perfect piece for this figure in my opinion. Now I know that the way I connected the visor isn't legal, but if I was a Lego part designer making this series officially, I bet I could find a good way to modify this armor piece to have some connections to do it legally. And as for accessories, just a simple neon green shield or something, and the classic printed tiles from Exploriens making up some kind of a small computer, and that I think is more than enough here. Another figure I have for you is one from the UFO sub-theme, and here we have another robot, as it was the only one I had pieces for, but I think it's a worthy representative of this faction. But of course I couldn't just use the classic head and torso, so I made a bit of a twist here again. Besides the printed legs from Nexonites I think, I gave him some kind of an alien device on the back with additional arms, and a collar made using Rex's visor from Star Wars, and I think it came out great. As for accessories, he's got a terminal made with a classic tile from this theme, with a minifigure hand acting as an antenna, and a Cosmic blaster from Guardians of the Galaxy, which is such a fun weapon design, I just had to use it in this series. The ninth figure in this lineup is another alien species introduced by Lego, but again in a heavily modified version, and that is an Insectoid. Looking at the old catalogs, the first thing that came to my mind was to use the head of 4LOM from Star Wars, and in my opinion, it was a bullseye. To match the head, I used other pearl grey pieces for the torso and legs, using respectively parts from Thor and a Geonosian, which work very well together, and I also gave him a piece of an alien armor from the original Insectoids line, just so we all know what faction is this guy from. And as for hand accessories, he's got a very alien looking blaster in one hand and some kind of a melee weapon or a device using another neon green piece from the original line of sets on the top, and I think that's all he needs to conquer the galaxy. Moving on to the next figure, this time we are revisiting the newer space subtheme, and that is my version of Alien Conquest that was introduced in 2011. Using a head from one of the CMF's figures we got few years ago, tentacle legs that originally came with Hades from the Disney CMFs, even more tentacles on the back from a Hidden Side minifigure, and a torso I have no idea where from, I think I managed to make a greatly fitting figure for that theme. And to make it even more interesting, I of course gave him an alien blaster and something to bless with it, being a small alien creature with 3 legs made with a plant piece, a weird looking head, and a classic spaceman helmet, just to have some kind of presence from that first ever space faction. Now, it's time for a little twist, because I've also made a figure from Lego City. Yep, you heard that right. As part of a Space CMF series, I made a normal astronaut. Well, almost normal, because I made him infected by some kind of an alien parasite that must have come from this glowing green space cube and started transforming him into an alien. And that, I think, is a way better way of using these arms and leg that we got in the Lego CMF Blacktron figure, as we can give this guy a far more sinister backstory. Looks like the call he's making now on his space telephone is the last one he'll ever make as a human. And the last figure I have for you in the series is actually not a normal space subtheme, as this alien was only introduced in one of the CMF series, but I guess we can make a nod to this line as well. So we have here a space exterminator, fully equipped with some kind of a space pest control substance on the massive tanks on his back, and a custom weapon shooting out that stuff in his hand, dressed in a black armored suit, and of course a gas mask or whatever on his face. And to have something to exterminate, I made a space slug using Crank from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles facing backwards, with a headgear piece from another CMF alien with googly snail eyes sticking out, making up a great little alien critter to finish up this series. And this way, friends, you've now seen all of the minifigures from my Space CMF series, which I couldn't be happier with. I wanted to make this theme since day one, because space was one of my most beloved themes to play with as a kid, but I had to think about it a bit more since it was such a nostalgic trip for me. But what do you guys think about these figures, and which one of them is your favorite? Do you think I made a better job than Lego with their original series? Let me know in the comment section below, and of course remember to drop a like and subscribe if you haven't done that yet, because I still have a lot of CMF themes to go through and you wouldn't want to miss that, would you? I will see you all in the next video here on Kubrick, and until then, friends, as always, make sure you keep it brickin'.